welcome to continuation of pre-calculus. Go ahead, open your books to page 414. We're going to go ahead and finish 5.1. This is 5.2. So the last two examples is what I left off for today. If you look on your book, there is fundamental identities, and it shows you, the different equations of the reciprocal of the functions, which we've done before. And then it has the Pythagorean identities. We will be using some today. Actually, we'll be using the main one. Sine squared plus the cosine squared is 1. So if we look at example 6, here it says, if cosine of t is equal to 3 over 5 and t is in quadrant 4, find the values of all the trig functions at t. So here we have to find all the values. That means there's 6 of them. Trig functions, whenever they mention that, that's all 6 of them. So if cosine of t is equal to 3 over 5, and we know that t, that means the given angle or degree, is in quadrant 4. Here we have to find all the values of the trig functions. So that means to find cosine, we always know they always go hand in hand. X and y. Cosine is always x, and then sine is always y. So for you to find all the 6 trig functions, you always need cosine and you always need sine. Here we have cosine. Now we have to go ahead and find sine. So to find sine, we have to go ahead and plug in using this equation, one of the identities, and we plug in what we know. We know cosine is 3 over 5, but here it says the cosine squared of t. So that means we have to square that one. If you notice here, there's no squared. If there was no squared, we have to square. If there is a squared, we just leave it as sine squared t plus 3 over 5. But it's not. And both of this is equal to 1. So here we're solving for sine because, again, we need to find cosine and sine to find all 6. We go ahead and square sine of t is equal to 9 over 25 equals 1. We're trying to get sine by itself. Subtract 9 over 25 to both sides. When you do that, you have sine t squared is equal to 16 over 25. Make sure I got that right. Yep. And then here, it's not by itself because it is squared, so we have to square root it to both sides. And then we get, sine of t is equal to 4 over 25. Remember, when you square root it, you square root the numerator and denominator. So now we have what our sine is. But keep in mind, whenever you square root something, it's plus or minus 4/5. So that means it could be positive, it could be negative. Then the quadrant is where it comes to play. Quadrant 4, we're looking for sine. So here, if we look at quadrant 4 in our unit circle, and this is why this is so handy, each of the corners, it tells us which one is positive and which one is negative. So your book has it too, like a brief picture. But here, if we look at quadrant 4, we're looking at sine. According to this, in quadrant 4, sine is negative. So that means it has positive or negative 4, 5. That means it could be positive, it could be negative. That's 2 answers, but we only want one answer, and that is negative 4/5. So now we have to keep on going. We have to find the sine, the cosine, and the tangent of each one. Then we have to find the cosecant, the secant, the secant, and the cotangent of each one. So now, the sine of t, according to this, we found it already, it's negative 4/5. Cosine is what they already gave us here in the original problem, 3 over 5. Tangent, to find the tangent, we have to divide. Remember, tangent is y divided by x. Y is always sine, x is always cosine. So don't get it confused. For me, I tend to think of it as sine being x, cosine being y. But in this case, cosine first, sine second, but it's y divided by x. So that's negative 4/5 divided by the cosine, which is 3 over 5. You have to get rid of the denominator, multiply it by the reciprocal to the top and bottom. This cancels out here. Negative 4/5 times 5 over 3. The 5's cancel out, and you're left with negative 4 over 3. Now, going here, cosecant. Cosecant is a reciprocal of sine. So negative 4 over 5, if you flip it, negative 5 over 4. Secant it's the reciprocal of cosine. So if cosine is 3/5, secant is 5/3. And then cotangent, since tangent is y over x, cotangent is x divided by y. So x is cosine, so 3/5. And we're going to divide that by the sine, which is negative 4/5. You multiply the numerator and denominator by the reciprocal, negative 5/4. This cancels out everything entirely. And then the 5's cancel out here, 3/5 times negative 5/4. And you end up with negative 3/4. And if you see for tangent, it's exactly the reciprocal. So negative 4/3, you flip it, you get negative 3/4. So these are all your 6 answers. Example 7. So example 7 says write tangent of t in terms of cosine of t where t is in quadrant 3. Here is where we start using these fancy identities here. Here, they want tangent in terms of cosine, meaning they only want, for the definition of tangent, they only want cosine for the definition. If you look here, tangent is equal to sine divided by cosine. There's two things going on. They only want one thing, which is cosine. So here, we have to use one of the properties over here, one of these 3 identities, and we have to try to get everything in terms of cosine. To do that, if you look here, we can have sines in terms of cosine if we were to solve for it. If I move over cosine, so I subtract both sides by the cosine of t squared, I get sine of t squared equals 1 minus cosine of t squared. And again, the reason why I'm doing this is because it looks like we can replace what the definition of sine is in place of this definition here, so we can get both in terms of cosine. Again, we don't want sine and cosine, they only want cosine in their definition for tangent. So here, that's why we have to use one of the identities. There's 3 of them. There's actually more, but we're just sticking with these 3 here. Now, sine of t squared is equal to 1 minus cosine of t. It's not by itself, we have to square root it. When you square root both of them, you get sine of t is equal to plus or minus 1 minus cosine of t squared. Keep in mind, we have what sine is. It looks like sine is equal to this whole definition here, but this is telling us there's 2 answers. Now they give us a key. They said quadrant 3. So for quadrant 3, sine is what? Is it positive or negative? And that's where we go back to the chart here. So remember, it goes from 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if we go to 3, it looks like sine is negative here. So it says negatives and what is positive. So here, sine is negative. So that means from one of your 2 answers, sine is negative 1 minus the cosine of t squared. Again, the squared here and the square root do not cancel out. Now, we can go ahead and look back at this definition. We have the tangent is equal to sine, which sine now, what we discovered, is negative 1, sorry, it's negative the square root of 1 minus the cosine square root of t over cosine of t. Everything is in terms of cosine. So here, we're trying to find cosine, so that means we have to find what sine is and put it in terms of cosine. So that means you have to use one of these 3 formulas to see which ones we can get by itself. So the answer is this right here, and that's all. Keep in mind, we're always focusing on the positive or negative signs. If you have any questions, make sure to email me down here. I'm always here during the mornings and probably until 5 every day. If you have any questions, again, email me. If you have my phone number, if you have Snapchat, anything like that, I always try to respond within, 8 hours at least. I miss you guys. Have a good day.